Now, before you jump down in the comments to rip me apart, allow me to explain. For a game that came out a little over a year before GTA 5, Sleeping Dogs not only did a lot of things better than what Rockstar previously achieved with GTA 4 and its DLCs, but it does a lot of things better than even GTA 5 itself, so let's talk about that. I think Sleeping Dogs does a lot of things very differently, and it doesn't try to be a GTA clone or whatever else you might want to call it. It's trying to do its own thing, and it does so very well. Before jumping into why Sleeping Dogs is such a great game, let's quickly go over the story of the game. A pretty good one if I'm being honest, but I'd still make a few changes that are mostly to my own liking. Also, very big spoiler warning, so if you want to skip this part specifically, please do so now. I feel like the main villain should have been Dog Eyes instead of Big Smile Lee, mostly because of Wei's pure hatred for him and that he's really unbothered by the fact that he's responsible for the death of Mimi, Wei's sister, and at first I really thought he was going to be the big bad guy at the end. His death is well executed and oddly satisfying, but that moment feels more dedicated to Mrs. Chu instead of the protagonist and or the player. And it also happens halfway through the story. A better plot point would have probably been if Dog Eyes killed Big Smile Lee and took over in his place, and maybe even becoming the Dragon Head right before the end of the story. I also feel like the overall final fight with Big Smile Lee was a bit underwhelming, as you just punch him a few times, then do a quick time event and throw him in the ice chipper for a semi-satisfactory end to his character and the story itself. Also, killing off Jackie at the end felt out of place and very much unnecessary. After all, we just rescued him like 2 missions earlier. Instead of him assisting us in some way for one last job, it makes us hate Big Smile Lee, sure, but that still doesn't take away from the pointlessness of him getting taken out of the picture. With all that being said, a few changes that I personally like doesn't take away from the fact that the plot is pretty good, and it helped to make the game more immersive and believable. And now let's see why I made the statement of Sleeping Dogs is better than GTA 5. Second warning. I'm about to go on a big ramble about the things and mechanics the game does really well, or at least that I found interesting when playing. You've been warned. Now let's get into it. A great start would be the fighting mechanics of the game and how they're introduced gradually. Fighting in this game requires more than a few brain cells and just spamming left click. Enemies are far stronger than your average GTA NPC, and some of them can't even be fought normally. For example, the big dudes can't be grappled and they can actually just throw you around like a leaf and you go into this quick time event in order to escape. Then there's enemies with knives, which again can't be grappled and are also far more dangerous. But thankfully you can disarm them and take their weapon to make your life easier. Also, the weapon they drop isn't infinite. You can just about kill 2 enemies before the knife can't be used anymore, and Wei just throws it on the ground, which makes your moment of safety not last very long, especially when you're in a 1v7 situation. We also don't see guns until like 15 to 20% into the game, I'd say, and that's a good thing. Because in something like GTA or even Red Dead Redemption, you expect to spawn with guns, or at least get into shooting people from the first 2 minutes in. For the most part at least, because that's also not the case in GTA 4 for the first few missions, unless you specifically go out of your way to obtain weapons in free roam, whether legitimate or not. And I feel like it belonged there just as well as it is the case for Sleeping Dogs. We're a cop after all, unless the bad guys have guns too. That's where nothing's off limits anymore. Also, introducing the guns later than expected means 2 things. One, you adapt the player better to the situations of having to fight off enemies with just your fists, which is a thing that happens far more often than having full-blown shootouts. And second of all, it makes for a more satisfying thing when guns play a part only in a few sections, and you can't just access the biggest and best weapons from the get-go. But that might just be a personal thing. Now don't get me wrong, I, as probably every other gamer in existence, loves a good old GTA style shootout, where you feel almost invincible and you gun down hundreds of people in a matter of minutes. But being almost as vulnerable as your enemies is a good and refreshing change. Because in this game, you can't really go in the middle of an enemy group and come out unfazed. You're gonna be very much phased when you die almost instantly. Taking cover isn't just a cute little thing you can do, it's pretty much mandatory, and you actually have to think when you poke your head out, and perhaps even wait for your enemies to make the first move. Overall, I think combat is handled really well in this game, and it feels like a good challenge, where getting good makes your life easier. And I did actually find myself dying far rarer than when I started playing, although I have to say, having to aim from left shift instead of the right mouse button, like in almost every other game, did feel a bit weird at the start. And also having the RMB, the input for getting in and out of cars, made for a lot of moments where I accidentally threw myself out of them, especially during missions where I would have to aim my gun while driving, which obviously led to a few mission fails. But I can't really blame anyone besides myself for that. There are probably better binds you can set on PC than the standard ones, but I didn't bother and just decided to adapt. Speaking of mission fails, there's a really good checkpoint system that puts you in a specific spot during the mission, which wasn't revolutionary, the GTA 4 DLCs already did that, but it's very much a plus. During story missions, you can find these statue collectibles that will then allow you to learn more moves at Sifu's dojo, to again make your life easier in combat and do sick moves whenever you're in a fight. A way for the player to actually care about getting these statues and make the combat upgrade seem like worth the hassle. I say hassle because you also need to bring them over to the dojo during free roam. Tying in with that, there are 3 other skill trees in this game, and 2 of them play kind of opposite to each other: top skill tree, triad skill tree, and face level. You can earn points, or even lose them in some cases, in order to unlock new abilities. For the cop skill tree, you lose points for doing any and all things that one might consider Grand Theft Auto-ish in the free roam, such as stealing cars, killing innocent civilians, destroying the environment, and even being clumsy? I don't know what they mean by that. I didn't really bother trying to keep my cop skill points, which meant I often had an imbalance between my cop abilities and my triad abilities, but I finished the game just fine without them, so I guess they're only relevant if you care enough about them. Triad skill points are earned by being the opposite of a good guy slash cop. You actually earn more points for killing people brutally, but that only applies to other gangsters, not ordinary people. And finally, face level is earned by completing random encounter missions similar to strangers and freaks from GTA 4 and 5. This unlocks certain abilities like a car valet and being able to purchase high-end cars. And because I mentioned cars, let's talk about them. The driving in this game is executed pretty decently for a game that doesn't really focus on that aspect. Well, apart from a few street races you can do, I guess. Also, having to drive on what felt like the wrong side of the road every single time was again a thing I had to adapt to, but I didn't mind it that much. Mostly because I did a lot of fast traveling in the free roam via taxis, which are as reliable as in any other HD GTA game. Except you can't hail for them. You just have to stop them in their tracks in order to use one. Call me lazy, and rightfully so, because the map isn't all that big, but I appreciate being able to zigzag across the map in the matter of a few seconds. But they seem to be disabled during missions, which kinda makes sense. I mostly chose to drive bikes whenever I had the chance to. They're pretty fun to ride around in this game, and I tried to do a wheelie for pretty much the entirety of all my drives. The game has all these kinds of challenges that pop up in the bottom right corner, that track your progress for how long you can wheelie, or how long you can go without wrecking your car. There's also drift and ramming mechanics attached to cars. Ramming specifically can come in handy when dealing with cops or enemy cars. You just let them get in front of you, and if you have enough speed you can just ram them off the road, and this usually gets them to slow down enough for you to lose them. A really good feature when needed, and you'll need it quite a bit when playing the game. Another great mechanic that plays a major role in this game are the hacking minigames, which are used to gain access to cameras, safes, or unlock these crates you can find around the map. They add an extra layer of challenge to your gameplay, and that is a really welcomed addition in my opinion, except the 4 digits hacking minigame. That one sucks. We also have girlfriends in this game. They play a minor role in the story, assisting us in a mission or two. We're then able to call them for a date that ends with a warm cup of coffee.
So hey, I have an idea.
Oh, really? Tell me more.
But weirdly enough, you can only date them once. Then they vanish completely out of existence, which is pretty weird. Dating each of them unlocks great perks like being able to see collectibles on your minimap or unlocking street races. So I guess they're all treated as a one-off quest rather than being an entire feature. But Wade gets his action in the end, so I guess it's not all for nothing.
Well, what else do you do for fun?
Are you coming on to me?
Yeah. Is that okay?
Yes, it's fine. I like it.
And speaking of calling people, this is another thing that plays into the story, as at certain points we progress by calling and receiving calls from other characters. That also ties in with my initial confusion of whether those cop missions are mandatory or not. Because I would often complete a mission and then having none left on the map, I would go for the blue ones, which are cop missions, duh, and complete them, to only then find out I had to go to bed in order to advance the story, which was a bit weird. But it allowed me to get sucked into the side content of the game, so there's that. And it also goes to show you how well made it is. Calls are also instant in this game for some reason, and when I say instant I really mean it. There's no ringing when calling someone. Wade just slaps his phone to his ear and begins talking, which is a thing I guess. Not complaining though.
Yeah, hello?
Amanda, it's Way. You doing anything later?
Now, after listing all these amazing things and features about the game that hooked me right in and got me immersed enough for me to finish the story and enjoy the side content as well, is it actually as good as GTA 5, or even better as I stated earlier? Yes and no.
Huh?
Okay, let's clarify things a bit. There are some things that Sleeping Dogs does super well, mainly combat since it's a combat focused game, obviously. but also the shooting, which is very much a minor thing. I think it does things better than GTA 5. First of all, you aren't a bullet sponge. You actually need to carefully consider your next moves and sometimes even your ammo, as well as adding in a sort of low-budget Max Payne shooting mechanic that works both on foot and in vehicles when dealing with enemies, and it plays pretty decently. Also, for an undercover cop story, I feel the amount of crimes we commit in order to bring down the Sun on Yi is perhaps astronomically higher than what the triads do themselves. And perhaps that's where a lot of GTA similarities come from. The game doesn't stop you from doing anything that would be considered a GTA thing, like stealing cars and killing innocent civilians. And if I'm being honest, just taking away a few cop points isn't a big enough incentive for the player to be a good guy. Here is where Rockstar takes the cake with Red Dead's honor system, more specifically in Red Dead Redemption 2. In that game, although you play as an outlaw, doing bad things in the free roam lowers your honor, and that affects how a lot of dialogue and cutscenes play out, and even the ending of the game. I think Sleeping Dogs could have borrowed that mechanic from the first Red Dead game, impacting the story by the player's actions during free roam, giving an extra layer of decisions to the player, thus presenting a sort of risk-reward scenario. Is it worth causing chaos if it affects the story? Perhaps to some, that would ruin the experience of the game. Killing bad guys and doing cool shit is the main selling point after all. But I couldn't help to think about that whenever I was free roaming around the map. Now, if it's something that the entire GTA franchise does the best and is so well known and beloved for, it's the open world these games offer, and that's hard to replicate. Not just to the developers of Sleeping Dogs in particular, but to any other studio and game franchise in existence. I've talked about it previously, but Rockstar's mastery when it comes to open world making and the immersion you get when you play around in one of their games is pretty much unmatched to this day. The insane level of attention to detail and the way the world can still exist without you doing anything and just observing it is also unreplicated. And for that reason alone, a lot of gamers put Rockstar on a pedestal, and rightfully so. Regardless of that, the game still manages to capture a unique vibe, and I feel like a sequel for it would have done things even better and make for a possible franchise. Even though this game is great and it was received very well at the time of its release, we might never get to see a sequel. We know there was a lot of talk of a possible Sleeping Dogs 2 game, and it was meant to continue Wei Shan's story but in a different city and featuring a second protagonist in either a co-op mode or a two-scenario story, probably similar to something like Resident Evil 2. And it was also said to be more focused on the cop aspect, having a feature similar to Gang Wars in GTA San Andreas, where you could reclaim territories and clean the streets of thugs, which would have been really fitting for the game. This would also impact how NPCs treat and respond to you. Beelining the story and not doing anything to clean up the streets would probably result in higher prices in stores, or not being able to do certain activities in the free roam. However, due to the game not selling very well in its first year after release, Square Enix decided to halt the production of the game, and although the original was received very well upon its release and it was acclaimed for being a great game in terms of combat and having a really good story, praise alone wasn't enough to warrant making a second game. And we might never see it, which is really sad considering the game could have competed with other big names in the open world genre. The game did at least receive a long list of DLCs for almost an entire year after release. Some small, just adding in a few clothing items. Others featured interesting challenges and minigames, and we even had some that added in new missions and cutscenes that follow a new subplot, like the Year of the Snake DLC or Nightmare in North Point. So the game was actually built upon even after its release, similar to how Rockstar also added in a bunch of DLCs. However, they introduced them in the online mode instead of the single player, but that's a different topic for another day. The release of the last major DLC for Sleeping Dogs was around March of 2013. This is also probably the point in which the publishers realized the game wasn't making enough to keep this trend going, but we can only hope for a miracle. If you've never played this game for some reason, I highly recommend this underrated gem. And if you're a hardcore GTA fan, you might need a few hours to really adjust your game sense and get used to the atmosphere. But you'll be very soon sucked into a beautiful experience accompanied by the greatest minigame ever. I don't get why people complain about Sandra and her karaoke mission. It's actually really fun. I had a lot of fun making this video and spending hours upon hours in the game just mindlessly roaming around and doing pretty much anything and everything. If you like what you saw, please leave a like, comment down below your thoughts about the game and the video itself, and if you want to see more of my content, consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching.